Let's pick up the Mars demo at option H for utilities. As the name suggests, this is a mixed bag of options. The first few are geared towards maintaining data integrity and data safety. Then we have a couple of other miscellaneous options. Let's look at the safety and integrity portion. System self-check. This system has many master files. You can add, edit, delete, and list data into these individual files. And every database management system, if it is going to be a fast, responsive system, has to have index files associated with the master files. At least one index file for each master file, sometimes 2 or 3 index files per master file. And these systems, this system of data files and indexes have to be kept in sync so you can find the data you're looking for. System self-check, this option goes through 20 checks and balances to make sure that the data is intact. So if I hit enter here, it says run this utility periodically to ensure that all system files are in sync. You proceed, and this is what you want to see. You want to see this reassuring statement, all data cross-checks are okay. If for any reason this option gives an error message, then you want to do a resequence of all the files. Resequence all the indexes so they are in sync with their master files. Sequencing complete, touch any key, then do a system self-check. Hopefully you'll get this reassuring message. For the most part, you don't really need to do these. The system takes care of itself, but it's always good to have that assurance. This option, incidentally, was my most important option for me when I was coding the system, because I had to do the self-check a million times as I was coding the system. Okay, so this is to give you an assurance everything is fine. This is to resequence all the files just as a maintenance tool. Let's look at this again. Resequence all the files as a maintenance tool. And more importantly, if you're unable to find the record that you're sure is in the system, if after using option H1 and this option H2, if you're still unable to find the record, then the record is not in the system. So let's say you did an option C4 to find a student that you thought was in the system, or some date that you thought was in the system, or some promotion, whatever. If you can't find that record, oops, I hit the escape key. Sorry. So if you do any of these options, you can't find the student or the hours or the promotion that you're looking for, do a resequence of all the files, do a system self-check, it comes back with OK. Now try and find the student or the date or the rank who you were looking for. If you still can't find it, it's definitely not in the system. So back to utilities. Now, backup data files onto the C drive itself. Your system is right now running from the C drive. So you can back up the data files onto the C drive periodically. In fact, you should do it just about every time you use the system. Before you shut down the system for the day, do a backup. In fact, do 2 backups, one here, one here. Let's look at this one. You want to back up the data files onto the local C drive itself. It does a resequencing, the backup is complete, touch any key, you have backed up all your data. If you come back in tomorrow, for example, and the system is malfunctioning, you can restore the data files from C. You back them up and you can restore them from the C drive. It says you will be restoring the data files back to this date and this time when you did the last backup. Do you want to proceed? You say yes. Are you sure of this action? Because you'll be setting yourself back to the image taken at this date and this time. One more time. Are you totally sure of this action? You say yes, and your data files have been set back to the date and time of the last backup. So be in the habit of doing a backup every day, at least 2 backups, one here, one here. This backs up the data onto the local C drive itself. Now you want to do a backup onto an external device, because if the system crashes, if the C drive crashes, it may crash bad enough so you can't even get to your backups on the C drive, and that's where this will get you out of a mess. Let's go back for a moment to option A, parameters. It says over here the backup thumb drive is the E drive on my computer. On my computer, one of the USB ports registers as an E drive. On your computer, it might be a D drive or an E or an F, whatever. You put in the appropriate letter over here where you have an active drive. Now, having done your regular backup on the C drive itself, you ask to back up the data files onto the E thumb drive. This letter comes from the option A parameter. Now watch very carefully. It says insert the backup thumb drive into a USB port that registers as an E drive. Very important, this E backup device, that thumb drive, must have a directory or folder on it named the exact name from where you're currently running the Mars software. So if on your C drive you're running the Mars software from a directory called /Mars, then this backup device, the backup thumb drive, must also have a directory or folder on it named /Mars. Whatever the name you're running from on the C drive must be on the backup drive. And this, of course, is to make sure that you're using the correct backup drive for the data backup, for the external data backup. So this is the internal data backup on the C drive itself. This is the external data backup. Hopefully your C drive will never crash and you won't need this one. But please do backups. Each time you back this one up on the internal drive, do it on the external drive also. Restore data files from C, we've seen that before. Of course, if your computer totally crashes, then you still have all your data files on the E thumb drive. So when you're up and running, simply copy all the contents of this drive into the same directory you had set up earlier. Change the system password. Of course, it asks you to enter the current password, which is case sensitive. Just a reminder, you can't see it on the screen. It says what's the new password, and you put in the entry and it says the new password has been accepted. Let me go back and change it back to the old one. Okay. Now, if you change the password and it says enter the current password, you put in some garbage. It says invalid current password, touch any key, and goes back into the loop. Do you want to change the system password? You say again, you try it again. Let's say I do start changing it, so I put in the current password and I hit enter. says what's the new password. Again, reminds you the new password also is case sensitive. Leave blank for no change. If you change your mind at this point, you can just leave it blank and say the password was, it says the password was not changed. So you can start changing it. If you change your mind, just leave it blank. Password was not changed, or you can actually go ahead and change it. Now, if you do change the password, please make sure you remember what it is. Now, the rest of these, this is a simple utility who showed up on a specific date. It defaults to today's date. I normally use this at the end of class to make sure that whoever showed up today did actually sign themselves in and put in their dojo time for the day. So I simply click on this option that defaults to today's date. I'm going to pretend this is today's date, and it gives me a list of these people. So that way I know that all those who came to class did remember to put in their time into the system. Just a simple utility. Create and edit a liability text document. Let's go back for a moment to option A, parameters. Over here I have said that in our dojo system we have liability release forms that the students need to sign. If you say yes over here, your very first next stop should be to create and edit the liability text document, so that when the student signs up, the system guides the student into reading and accepting the liability release right on the screen. Back here for a moment. I want to create and edit the liability text. It reminds me that you're entering the text for the adults system, because your legal verbiage might be different between the adults and the kids system. Touch any key to continue. Now, this is where you start typing in the legal text of your liability release form. Page down to page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5. You have 5 pages of all these lines where you can enter the text of your liability release. Hopefully 5 pages should be more than enough legal mumbo jumbo. Now, if your legal text completely fits on this one page, you don't need the other pages. Type in the phrase end of text on any separate line of its own. You must have one end of text phrase at the end of the entire text on a separate line. In this case, it's on page 5, end of text. But if your text ends over here, you only have so much of legal text, and you say end of text, you will not be able to go page down to page 2. There will not be a page 2 or a 3 or a 4 or a 5. If your text goes through all these lines and you put an end of text over here, that's it. You have 2 pages of text. You can't page down to a page 3, 4 and 5 and so on. But you have up to 5 pages, and you can put in whatever you want as your legal text for the student to accept. This is what the student will see when he or she is signing up for your dojo. Okay, so you can overwrite anything on the screen and on the next 4 screens. Hopefully 5 screens should be more than enough space to hold the legal contents. The very first line cannot be totally blank. This very first line must have something in it, or the system won't recognize this entire page. You can skip lines if you wish. So you can write on the red lines or on the black lines. You can skip them as you wish. You can page up and down among the 5 screens. When you are done with the entries, Put in the phrase end of text on its own separate line without the hyphens. It's looking for end space of space text. I had to show this one with the hyphens, otherwise this itself would trigger off the end of text and I would not be able to showcase pages 2, 3, 4 and 5. But when you put in the end of text, it has to be end space of space text. And there you have it. Okay. This is an important utility option, and this is a new option in our system, so it has never been run, and I need my sensei's permission and let them decide how they want to run it. We have tons of old data going back to the 1980s. This data was downloaded from a previous system, and we have just retained it in this system just for the heck of it, but things need to be archived. So the word archive means that we take some records out of the main database and put them into a historical database. So if you need to, you can always go back to the historical database and pull off a couple of records from it to make them current for whatever reason. But watch carefully. Archive and unarchived student records. So again, the word archive means take some records out of the current database and move them to history, and they will no longer be in the current files, but you can always pull off a couple of records from history. Now, this option is common regardless of whether you are doing an archive or an unarchived option. Let's say for now, let's concentrate on archive. I want to archive some data, and some folks who have been there for a very long time, who are now black belts and so on, will also be archived, and maybe you don't want to archive some of those records. So you can add, delete and list exceptions to the archive. Let's concentrate on the archive. So I'm going to say that yes, I want to do an archive, but I want to exempt a few folks from the archive. So I'm going to add, say, an archival step. This is an archival step. It defaults to A. Put in the exception. It's optional. You don't have to put in exceptions to the archive. But let's say this person is now on the exceptions list. I don't want this person's record archived. Archive again. Another Martens. This person is also on the exceptions list. If you make a mistake and accept this person again, it says this person is already on the exceptions file or list. Let's pick one more, Martini. This person is also on the exceptions list. You can list them out to see who's on the exceptions list. B Martens and C Martens and R Martini, these are some of our senseis. So when I go to archive some data, I don't want these records archived. Now, you can also delete someone from the archival list. For example, let's say I do want Sensei Martini's record archive, so I can delete him from the exceptions list. Confirm the delete, yes. He has been removed from the exceptions list. So if you list it out now, the only exceptions are B Martens and C Martens, and so on. So let me add Sensei Martini back to the exceptions list. So he along with B Martens and C Martens will be exempted from the archive. Now, there is nothing to edit in this list. You either add a record to be exempted from the archive or you don't add the record. This is simply to keep in line with add, edit, delete, and list, that cascade you've seen all along. Now, having put in the exceptions to the archive, if you want to, they are optional, you can now ask to archive data. Watch carefully. So depending on the cutoff date you select, this archive will bypass up to 3 students identified in the exceptions to the archive. Now clearly, you're going to ask to archive data based on a date. So every student who joined on or before that date will be archived. So depending on the date you select, the 3 exceptions may or may not even need to be exempt. They may not even fit the category. Anyway, it says verify the exceptions list carefully. Do you want to proceed? You can always say no. Look at the exceptions list again carefully. Are these the exceptions to the archive? Yes. Let's archive. Go ahead. Enter the date through which you want the records archived. Our records go back to 1980, so I want to say that all those who joined on or before June 30th, 2019 should be archived. I selected this as my cutoff date. So it tells you all students who joined prior to or on June 30, 2019 will have their records archived. 3 possible exceptions have been identified. Correct. Further confirmation, all students who joined as of July 1, the cutoff date was June 30. So all those who joined as of July 1 will have their records preserved. The 3 exceptions to the archive will also have their records preserved. All this makes sense. So far so good. You have to confirm the archive action 3 times. Yes, yes, yes. It's now archiving all students who joined prior to or on this date. The archive is done. Touch any key. The first thing I want to do is go back for a moment to H1, do a system self-check. Make sure all the files and indexes are in sync, and they are. You should now go to see the list of students who are left behind in the current database. That's all the students left behind. These are 19 in the first screen. That's 20, 21, 22. Oh, sorry. There are 15 on the first screen. 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 records, and that's all. But notice that B Martens, C Martens, and Sensei Martini, their records have been preserved, although they joined many years ago, long before the cutoff date. It starts at the earliest is C, so clearly my name is not there. I have been archived. My friend Mr. Andrews has been archived, and so on. I'm going to restore the data files back again to what they were before the archive. So I can redo this again. Are you totally sure? Yes. Good. Let's go again for the archive and unarchive. So clearly this list is empty. No one's out there because we reset everything. Once again, I'm going to add the exceptions to the archive. Let's just pick only B Martens this time. List. There's only 1 exceptions to the archive. I'm going to archive the data through June 30th, 2000. Whoops. 2019. Now, it tells me there are right now there are 560 current students on the file before the archive. So we get this information again. We continue 3 times, confirm it. You're going to end up with 542 records. Out of 560, you're going to end up with 542. That leaves you, 542 are going to be archived. That leaves you with 18 records current. Again, right away, you do a system self-check. When you make any major change, do a system self-check. Everything is okay. C4, look at who's left. 15, 16, 17, and 18. And once again, B. Martens has been preserved, but C. Martens and Sensei Martini, their records were archived because they were not exceptions to the archive in our second run. Let's try it one more time, H5 to reset everything. H9, archive. Now just for the heck of it, no exceptions to the archive list, everyone is going to be archived. Cutoff date again June 30th, 2019. Let me go back for a moment. When you archive data, it tells you right up front you have so many current students. The reminder stays there. June 30th, 2019 is my cutoff date. If I go ahead, it says I'm going to end up with 543 records being archived. These are the number of records that are going to be archived. That leaves you with 17. It showed you very quickly on the screen what's left behind. Archive is complete. Once again, right away, system self-check. We made a major change here. Everything is fine. Option C4, 15 up here and 2 down here, so 17 records left behind. Notice that there are no Martens and there's no Sensei Martini. So there's your archive option. The same option can be used to unarchive data. Let's look at this carefully. If I now go for archive or unarchive, it tells me there are 17 current students. The earliest date of joining is now July 15, 2019 because we archived everything through June 30th, 2019, and the earliest next date of joining is July 15. Now I want to do an unarchive. Now clearly the reason for archiving data is to reduce the burden on the main system where students have been outdated for many years. So clearly the unarchived data will be very selective. You can only pick and choose a few records to be unarchived. You can't unarchive everything because then that won't make any sense. Watch carefully. You have not defined which students are to be unarchived. Use option H9(1). You have to add selections for the unarchived. That's mandatory. The exceptions to the archive are optional. You may or may not identify some exceptions to an archival. But to bring back data in from history into the current database, you have to be selective. So you have to add selections for the unarchived. I'm going to put a U over there. It tells me right away the selection is mandatory. I'm going to unarchive B. Martens is now on the selection list for the unarchived. It defaults to A, so be very careful. Unarchived C. Martens and unarchived Sensei Martini. So if you take a list, these people are on the list, these senseis are on the list for being unarchived, and only they will be unarchived. So unarchived data reminds you you have 17 current records. At the end of the unarchived, where 3 of them are coming in, you'll end up with 20. Up to 3 selected student names will be unarchived. Proceed. Yes. Confirm it again. 1, 2, 3. It has done it. System self-check. Everything is okay. Let's look at the students. B. Martens, C. Martens, and Sensei Martini. These senseis are back in the picture again, exactly as intended. Let's go to the unarchive again. Once you do an archive or unarchive, the original list is gone. So add exceptions to the archive or unarchive. So let me unarchive my record, and let me unarchive Mr. Andrews' record, and just confirm these are the people to be unarchived. Unarchived data reminds you now you have 20 current students. Up to 2 selected student names will be unarchived. Proceed. Yes, 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 yes. And it's done. It's doing a duplicate sequencing and no harm done. System self-check. Everything is okay. If you look at the student master file, Andrews and Barucha are back in the picture. B. Martens, C. Martens, and Sensei Martini were picked up earlier, so everything is fine. And obviously it's not just the student master record that comes in. My dates, my times, my promotions, they all come in. So it's not just one record that's coming in, multiple records are coming in for the unarchive and going out for the archive. So there you have it. It's a useful option to do some house cleaning after a few years of running your system. And that's it for option H, utilities.